This story happened to my father's friend in the distant year 98, in the vicinity of Krasnoyarsk. The places there are not exactly remote by Siberian standards, but having lived for a long time in the south, I now realize that the taiga is very different from the forest. The energy there for an unaccustomed person is heavy and pressurizing, making you feel insignificant and defenseless in these boundless wilds. The hero of my story was a man not just accustomed, but in the full sense of the word grew up in these places. That evening our family organized shashliks at the dacha. The occasion was chosen the most traditional. The first Friday of this week friends of my parents came with their children, so that I had a lot of activities. We played hide and seek, ran around the site and fed cats, and without that obese for the summer over the measure of dacha cats. The sun was slipping toward sunset. Everyone was waiting for the arrival of the last guest, Uncle Yura, my dad's retired colleague, who had miraculously excused himself from work. But he didn't arrive on the last train. He didn't show up an hour later and 2 hours later, and when it was finally dark, everyone decided that he was bannily late and would come tomorrow morning to hangover. However, when it was well past midnight, from the side of the forest on the plot, and it was the most extreme, and from the forest we were separated only by a small clearing, and a fence of 1 meter high, came in his own person Uncle Yura, all skinned, dirty and some nervous. Well, we soaked him, of course, with vodka, and he, having smoked, told a terrible story of his night journey. It turned out that he still managed to catch the train, but he overslept our station, passed 2 extra ones, and, coming out at a deserted peninsula in the fading dusk, decided to take a shortcut through the forest. The railroad in this place gives a decent detour, and you can wind a couple of extra kilometers on the sleepers. So he walked along the familiar, not once walked path, when it was completely dark and Yura realized that it is unclear how he lost his way and does not understand where he is. The places were not familiar at all. There was a spacious glade and the stones were huge and a half my height. I have seen such stones only on the pillars, and in our places there is no such thing, he recalled. Having realized that it was foolish and hopeless to look for the road in the dark, in an unfamiliar place, besides, one could go even deeper into the forest, and having chosen the wrong direction, enter the swamp or walk for 100 kilometers, Yura decided to spend the night on the spot. He made a fire, had a snack of supplies brought with him on the occasion of the banquet, and began to wait for the morning. That's where it started, he said, not without a tremor in his voice. At first there was a feeling that someone was looking at my back, but such things happen in the forest. I did not pay attention at first, only made the fire hotter. But the feeling didn't go away, it only got stronger. Then the feeling of danger came, and so sharply that I couldn't stand it. I jumped up, grabbed a branch from the fire, spinning on the spot like a fool, poking this torch into the darkness, not knowing where to expect trouble. And it seems to me that there is someone in the bushes and I can hear their whispering and shadows flickering. Then I snapped, I threw my branch and ran into the forest like a moose, like a headlong rush, anywhere I wanted to run away, only to not see this damn meadow anymore. I was running, not caring the road. How long I was running like that, I do not remember, but I just stumbled and rolled out on this very clearing. My fire was smoldering there, and my things were lying next to it. I thought that after Afghanistan I would not be able to be so frightened of anything, but here I was in a real panic. And it all seemed to me that behind me there was something that I'd rather never see. I rushed again into the forest, but there was no way out of the clearing. There is no way out of the clearing. No way out of the clearing. No way out of the clearing, no matter how hard I try. Everywhere there are trees and dead wood, a thicket so that you can't crawl on your belly, and the whispering of this evil is getting louder and louder, and I can't even describe it. A feeling of anger that was coming from this place, inhuman, inordinate anger. I don't know what I would have done, but I remembered that I had a flashlight. In my flashlight I ran to the fire, and Stepanik, our gamekeeper, ran to meet me. He grabbed me by the hand and dragged me through the bushes to the break, and that's what surprised me, where I was going to crawl on my belly. We ran like a bullet, as there were no trees or dead wood. 5 minutes later he led me to the trail. Our fucking trail. How did I get lost there? Run, he says, Yurak, and God forbid you turn around. So I ran. Oh, how I ran. And behind me there was crackling, rumbling and roaring, speeding me up. And so I ran all the way to the village. Pour me a drink, I'm exhausted. All this conversation we valiantly overheard from beginning to end, while the adults were pumping alcohol into Uncle Yura and, just in case, collecting and loading my father's old EJ. That night there was a strong storm and our cottage was literally cracking from the gusts of wind, the windows tinkling pitifully. No one seemed to have slept. And the morning came in tears. Grandma Katya, the wife of that huntsman Stepanik, came to collect money for the funeral of her husband, who died from the heart, according to her words last night, about 10 hours before the events described by Yura. For a long time the adults in the village whispered and did not let us go, not only into the forest, but even beyond the territory of the plots. The next day the men found Uncle Yura's belongings, not far from the path, torn to shreds, but there was no clearing or rocks nearby, nor could there be. After university I got into hunting. In 2014 I bought a rifled barrel. We went hunting with my father, my uncle and 5 other men in 5 cars. In Omsk, of course, there is no Krasnoyarsk taiga, but if you go to the north for 250 kilometers, there will be mixed impassable forest. We left from Muromtsevo, about 270 kilometers, to the village of Tarmakla. We arrived late. At 9 o'clock, we started to set up a camp, a fire, put the cars around, barricaded the passages between the cars as far as possible, well, from wild animals, so that it would be easier to sleep in tents. We sat down, drank vodka, ate, but without shouts, songs. Everything is rank and noble. I look well drunk. Uncle Lesha got up and went towards the forest. Well, I think in need his absence, except for me, no one noticed. Then in 10 minutes I started to realize why. If he was going to the toilet, did he take with him a third of a loaf of bread, lard and onions? I began to brag to the people, so and so and so and so. All climbed into UAZ trucks, their headlight searchers turned on. But where is it? 30 meters penetrate deep into the forest and all began to gather, put on unloads, take out flashlights, load weapons. Flashlights, by the way, all had excellent. The nearest village was about 12 kilometers to the east. Uncle Lesha went to the northwest. We stood in a chain, a distance of 25 to 35 meters. All the men were former military. 3 had been in hot spots. Uncle Lesha was 2 times in Angola and moved. For an hour passed about 3 kilometers. Further were simply not to pass. At night exactly, impassable forest. We came back about 2 a.m. We think we will start searching from 6, and only we came back to the camp. In 7 minutes Uncle Lesha came out right from where we were. He had a basket in his hands. There was a basket with sour cream and black stale bread, but he had a muddy head. He was mumbling something, and characteristically, he was wearing only pants and a t-shirt, but he was clean, and we had picked up branches for an hour of wandering, scratched all our faces, but he was clean. Anyway, he left after about 10 minutes and began to tell us. I'm sitting, someone from the forest whispers, let me eat bread and lard. And then, he says, I was like a rush, no fear, took the food and went. I came to the edge of the forest. I looked, the path is so wide, I followed it and went. He says, after 8 to 10 minutes I came to a hut, a small clearing, a hut, a well, a small shed and a toilet. My grandfather and grandmother came out and called me to their house, and I was feeling a little blissful, so I went in. 2 kerosene lamps were burning. They sat me down at the table and started to ask me why I came. So I said that someone asked for food. My grandmother got scared and said, don't believe him, don't go to him. She took the lard and bread. Then together with my grandfather she started to tell me something. And then Uncle Lyosha said something like a bell went off in my head. There can't be this house here. There can't be all this. Let's remember all our military skills. They started begging me to stay. I refused. Then the grandmother gave me sour cream and bread and said, go back. If he asks for food, you better give it to him. I went back out, walked along the path at a fast pace. While I was walking, my head was heavy and cloudy. He walked 1 kilometer in 5 minutes and came out to the camp, and we were right there. According to his data, he was gone about 40 minutes. According to ours, about 2.5 hours. We did not find any trail either at night or in the morning. In the morning we combed the forest for 5 kilometers, no paths, no clearings, nothing. Only evidence was left: sour cream and bread. In the morning the basket was empty, no bread, sour cream was eaten. None of ours touched it. At lunchtime we got off and drove to the village we came through, the village of Tarmakla. Let's ask the locals what's there and how. All of them say the same thing, but the places there are dead, we don't go there at all. My father once told me how in his distant youth he and his grandfather were called to help transport a coffin with someone's deceased grandmother to a helicopter. The village was still under construction, and communication with the mainland was only by river and air. They carry this coffin open. My father stumbles, shakes the coffin, but holds it. He turns to the coffin to correct his hands, and the grandmother's head turned sideways in his direction, her mouth slightly twisted and one eye opened. My father cursed to himself, saying, "We're barely dragging you through the gullies to the takeoff, and you're lying there smiling." The coffin was safely sent. Grandfather and father went home, thawed the sauna. In the evening, my father bathed. He was about to leave the bathhouse. The door to the outside was locked. He pulled the handle, kicked it, heard the door from the steam room to the anteroom open behind him, and someone giggling. He said all his hair stood on end. He was alone in the bathhouse. He turned around. In the steam room on the top shelf sits that grandmother, looking with one eye and smirking with the corner of her mouth. He rushed to the door again, shouting and beating. It was locked. He looked back over his shoulder and saw the grandmother sitting there, smirking. My father turned around, slid down the door with his back, and said to the grandmother, "Well, why are you clinging to me?" "I'm sorry I stumbled, but I held you up. They didn't drop you." And as he sat there, his back fell out of the bathhouse. He jumped up, checked the latch on the door, looked into the anteroom. The door to the steam room was closed. Everything was quiet. Everything was all right. So, he thought he was burning up. He was imagining all sorts of nonsense. So he decided to look into the steam room just in case. And the grandmother hadn't disappeared. She was sitting on the shelf, wagging her finger and even winking. My father told me that he didn't even remember how he flew through the door. Kalitka door. He flew into the house all white and wet. When he recovered and told me how he had steamed, we laughed, but just in case we mentioned that grandmother. And then my father went to the bathhouse for several years only on a white day.